Some buildings in my neighborhood stay empty forever. Now I know why. By Nikki XX. I first stared into the pit the day of the first earthquake. It was early September, a couple days after Jenna and I moved into the Werner building in the Koreatown district of Los Angeles. I was walking home from CVS run. I found a good parking spot for once, a free space without a meter right in front of the burner building. I wasn't about to give it up for the sake of plastic hangers and Red Bull, especially when the alternative was a 6 block jog on a unseasonably cold, pleasant day. The pit sat at the corner of the side of the street lined with squat little trees and red brick. Art Deco inspired apartment buildings left over by bygone era when Mid Wilshire was played a playground for the Hollywood elite. The pit would eventually become a strip mall with an underground parking lot, according to the building plan on the display. But in early September, it was still a lifeless construction site surrounded by a mesh covered rent-a-fence. Curious, I peered through a tear in the barrier and saw exactly what I had been expecting to see: a square hole dug out of a bone dry earth. Nothing exciting, nothing threatening, just another unfinished development in a gentrifying neighborhood. But I couldn't look away. I stood like an idiot, plastic CVS bag dangling from my hand, face pressed against the filthy black fabric, staring at a giant hole. I imagine climbing the fence, opening the dusting ground, and throwing myself off the cliff. As though it was a hard floor of the pit would transform into water beneath me. It's a French term, l'appel du vide, the call of the void. It's a subconscious drive to self-sabotage, the inexplicable urge that propels us towards things which we should cover in fear. The day of the earthquake was the day I first heard the call, and every day since then, I've been dragged further and further into the void. The earthquake hit around 9:30 that night. It was an event experienced and quickly forgotten. At 4 on the Richter scale, strong enough to inspire a deluge of earthquake-related posts and clog my Twitter feed, but not strong enough to do any actual damage. When I felt the ground shift under me, I was leaning on the second floor balcony of the Werner building, sipping my Red Bull and staring across the street at a fenced in, overgrown parking lot. My new apartment in the Werner building, south of Wilshire in Koreatown, like so many aspects of my life, had come by less by desire than a lack of better options. I previously lived in North Hollywood. I had my own studio with air conditioning, a pool, and an on-site laundry. That was good to me. Then in August, I quit my shitty Burbank barista job for a slightly less shitty concierge gig at a renovated downtown hotel. These trips south of the 101 rush hour convinced me, unequivocally, it was time to move. This isn't to live with Jenna, like the Werner building, was a choice out of convenience. She and I met 2 years ago as co-workers at a Starbucks in Pasadena. Her after-school job, my humiliating post-collegiate drop in the standards. We kept in touch on Facebook and Instagram, commented on each other's posts, swapped smiley face emojis. It was through social media that I'd been learned that she, like I was, looking for a roommate and a place south of the hills. Jenna worked for night shifts for a Hollywood ambulance company. She departed a couple hours before the earthquake, leaving me alone in an hour or two bedroom apartments. For $2,100 a month, we got ancient pipes, a roach problem, no air conditioning, and an aesthetic best described as white lady in a horror movie. I'd open all the windows and turn the fan. but the afternoon had warmed and thick the walls of the Werner building made an oven for our little unit. It was too hot to accomplish anything productive, so I wandered to the second floor balcony instead. Then the world vibrated, turning my energy drink and instigating a violent rattle of metal on metal. Seconds later, all was still. A metallic clatter continued as gravity caught up into the inertia. Curious as to where the noise was coming from, I walked to the edge of the balcony and peered around the building. I saw a rickety fire escape, barely clinging onto the stucco wall by nails, probably hammered in the 1950s. The rattling was a loose ladder smacking against its base. The structure seemed completely pointless. It descended to a platform on the third floor, from which a jump to the asphalt below would be a jump to one's death. Death by fire, death by massive trauma, I thought. I should decide which one I prefer, just in case the place goes up in flames. By next morning, I'd forgotten about the pit, the earthquake, and the useless fire escape. I began to explore Koreatown. Koreatown is blatantly, perennially dirty. Discarded fast food bags, abandoned household items collect like driftwood along the thin patches of dry glass between the sidewalks and curbs, playing host to nest of roaches. There are a lot of homeless people. They stake the temporary claims on the steps of the Korean Methodist Church, beg for change outside of Ralph, leave their stolen shopping carts stuffed with trash and festering perishables by bus stops. When I went out at night, I'd see them sleeping along the sidewalks, curled under filthy blankets. But one bit at a time, I fell in love. Shannon worked most nights. There wasn't much to appeal to sitting alone in our sauna of an apartment. So I started taking long walks after the sun went down. And suddenly, Koreatown became one of those I Spy books I loved as a kid. Everywhere I looked, something new and interesting caught my eye. Those blocks around the Werner building seemed to thrown together like the window display of a pawn shop. Assorted pieces propped practically against one another with little regard for cohesion or theme or aesthetic merit. There were Korean barbecue joints that didn't have an English menu, cash and carry liquor stops next to trendy eateries, beat up taco trucks stalled outside the Korean market, expensive coffee shops open till 2 a.m., and salons with their names like Happy Nail and bars on the windows. I found liquid nitrogen ice cream joints, pit and staircases, record shops nestled on the top floor corners of shopping complexes with one entrance and one exit. Karaoke rooms in the basement of office buildings, populated by Korean doctors and lawyers and bankers. Dark, dirty alleys with their gorgeous graffiti art. I started taking my camera on my walks. I've never been particularly into urban exploration or gritty realism, but the neighborhood inspired me. I put better photographs on my DeviantArt page, and to my surprise, they garnished more positive attention than any of my drawings or short stories. Then I even had a better idea. I met a number of interesting people during my nighttime sojourns. They all like to talk, to tell stories about the neighborhood, the history of the neighborhood, how the neighborhood used to be. I decided to record, with permission of course, all of this local lore to create a short oral slash visual online diary of collective experience. One Saturday in October, I took a walk to a favorite hidden gem, an independent youth bookstore called the Page Turner, located on the second floor of the shopping plaza off Olympic between a check cashing place and a tanning salon. On previous points or trips, I'd found V.C. Andrews novels long out of print, Agatha Christie anthologies, and books of photography from pre-revolutionary Iran, all under $10. The lady who owned and operated the page turner, Shannon, sat behind the register, watching a video on her iPhone. I made a beeline for the back. There! The oldest and strangest volumes sat boxes on the floor or thrown haphazardly onto rickety wooden shelves. A paper sign reading 50 cents each hung above. I like that they're the best. Amongst the dopey romance novels out of print since the 50s, the Vanity published conspiracy theories of Hollow Earth, the golden bound reference books, and the outdated encyclopedias. Reality felt slightly altered in that dusty corner of the page turner. I reached for a book on the unstable shelf above my head. I don't remember what the book was. There might have been a dragon on the spine. I grabbed hold of it and tugged. I must have leaned on the other shelf with my other hand for balance because it collapsed under my fingers and crashed into the shelf below it, spilling its contents all over the carpeted floor. I jumped back and yelped. Ah! I heard footsteps behind me, Shannon rushing over to appraise the mess I'd made, and a mess it was. But one aspect of the literary dog pile caught my attention. It was a small, thin volume, black and nondescript. On the cover, two shapes, a 7 with its roll on the tip and a curly end. A white sheet of paper peeked out from between the pages. I snatched up the little book open to a random page. It was written in a language I'd never seen before. There were a lot of curves and triangles. Below one paragraph, a simple illustration. Blob-like creature with 10 snout legs, 3 curled horns popping out of what I guessed was its head, pitch black eyes, and jagged mouth. It was terrifying in a way that I couldn't really explain. Shit, not again. I turned. Shannon had arrived, shaking her head and scowling. Don't worry, sweetheart, she said to me. I got to get rid of these shelves. I'll clean it up. I held out the little black book. Hey, do you know what this is? She plucked it out of my hand and flipped through the pages, vague recognition on her face. Jesus Christ, I thought I got rid of all of these. There were more? I asked. What language is that? She shrugged. No idea. And yeah, the weirdos who rented out the space before me left a few books like this behind. I threw them all on the discount shelf, but they didn't sell. I thought I tossed them all. Who rented the space before you? Some Christian group, Shannon replied. She shook her head. I never met them myself. The rental agent said they left in a real hurry. Secret folks, she called them. I've been here 10 years, and the most I've gotten from renters who had been here longer than they were, odd. Religious nuts. She handed the book back to me. You can keep this if you want. It's worth shit to me. I slipped the book into my purse. I knew of somebody who'd been thrilled at the prospect of decoding chicken scratch at a bizarre tone. My old college roommate, Adrene, who was pursuing her master's in linguistics at USC. Seriously, Amelia, what is this? Jenna and I sat at the couch, me, looking over a batch of photographs from the night before, her paging through the little black book. I told you, I said. It's like a book of summoning spells or something. The chick at the shop said it belonged to some religious whack shops who were there, like 10 years ago. These illustrations are disturbing. She held up a page. It depicted a human-like figure with elongated alien eyes, a face resembling that of an insect, and antennae sticking out of its head. What was creepier was the beast he sat on top. Its face was rounded and bloated, with an equine nose but opal, eerily human eyes, and a thick scribbled mane. Something fell out of the book and landed on the dusty carpet. I picked it up. It was a sheet of paper I seen earlier, folded with yellowed and age, peeking out from between the pages. I unfolded it. On the paper was a blotchy black ink drawing that resembled a simple map. The map you draw in the old days when somebody gave you directions to a place, before GPS. Lines almost not quite forming a grid-like pattern, with a pentagon superimposed on top. Dots from 5 corners of the pentagon each accompanied a simple little picture. A picture with a rounded bottom and a curled handle. A spoked wheel, 3 circles linked together like the Olympic rings, a butterfly, and a cross with a third line for the T. What do you think this is? I showed Jenna. A map or something? Jenna sighed. They couldn't, write anything on it. In English? Wouldn't that have been easier to work with than kindergarten drawings? Easier for them to read it? Maybe. Easier for the outsiders like us to decipher the nefarious plans? Definitely. But you know what bothers me the most? I snatched the book back from Jenna, closed it, and held up the cover. I feel like I've seen this symbol before. It wasn't until a few hours later that I figured where I seen the pictograph on the cover of the indecipherable tome. The fancy 7 and the curly N. Jenna had left by then. She'd gone to take her dirty clothes to the laundromat on Vermont. We planned on hitting hookah bar found by Wilshire and Oxnard that night, with a girl from the building named Britton. I took some pictures of the pages with a little black book and emailed them to Adrien, who was a former college roommate studying with linguistics. Then I transcribed one of my spontaneous late night interviews, a cook at Denny's this time. He told me a cute story about hawking street dogs outside the Wiltern after Guns N' Roses show. The revelation came as I clicked for the thumbnails of photos I'd taken, searching for the perfect one to accompany drunk groupies and the tattooed hustlers selling bootlegged t-shirts. I lingered on a shot of the empty lot across the Werner building, taken through a hole in the cheap plywood that covered the fence. It was an experimental failure, too dark for good anything, but a wooden telephone pole had been caught in the flash. There was graffiti on the telephone pole, old, fading red graffiti. A 7 with an extra wave and a curly N, an exact match to the odd symbol on the cover of a little black book. Okay, lost my track. Later that night, on my way to the hookah bar, I approached the empty lot across from Werner building. Since the night of the earthquake, when I first spied on the place on the balcony, I'd afforded a little attention. Along the plywood buffered fence were cheap, tagged up signs reading private property, no trespassing, and East River development. I stopped in front of the telephone pole, inadvertently caught in the photo. There they were, all right, and the line of my phone. I could recognize the 2 logograms spray painted in red, a 7 with a flourish and curly N. I reached out and touched the letters. They were old and worn, nearly invisible if you weren't looking for them. Then I noticed 2 things at the same time. A gate, from which broke in a padlock hung and cracked open, allowing me to peer into the empty parking lot. And in the middle of the empty lot, a solitary figure crouched near the ground. I jumped. The figure was moving. In the dim yellow light of the nearby street lamps, I could see it was a person, braced on all fours, scratching at the ground, digging like a dog. There was a faint crunch, crunch, crunch as the earth was dislodged. Curious, I stepped through the open gate and into the lot. East River Development obviously cared little about the state of their property. It was a burnt yellow wasteland. Thorny weeds grew out of the tough, dry ground, as high as my waist, cluttered with trash. I'd better get a look at a figure. It was a man, about 50 feet away from me. Kneeling in the clearing, he was clawing at the dirt. He was thin, but I couldn't make out any other distinctive features. I didn't move any closer. An icy shudder rippled from down my spine. I got the inexplicable sense that the gate was more than a physical barrier, that I was committing a sin far graver than trespassing. Crunch, scratch, crunch, scratch. Sir, I called out to him. He ignored me. There was something oddly graceful about his movements, something fluid, flexible. Man, do you need help? Scratch, scratch, scratch. Couldn't have been any easier. The ground below my feet felt as hard as rock. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I was about to shine my phone's flashlight on him when he raised a long, thin arm and waved. Crunch, crunch, scratch, scratch, scratch. He kept on waving, his bony hand extended, pale fingers catching the moonlight. The chill I felt curdled into panic, and I turned up and all but drove back for the gate, then ran until I saw brighter lights of Wilshire. I hurried for the rest of the way to the bar. Starlight, Boba, and Hookah. The digging man unsettled me. Couldn't stop thinking about him, about the skeletal, white, milky white appendage he raised to acknowledge me? What was he doing, anyways? I assumed he was homeless. The neighborhood's transient population was obviously familiar with the lot, judging by the discarded mattresses I'd seen lying around. Was he digging for treasure, burying his daily panhandling earrings? It seemed impractical, at the least. Or maybe it was just the empty energy the empty lot excluded. They say you can sense someone staring at you, even when you're fast asleep. That's what I felt as I stood amongst the dry leaves, unseen eyes boring into my back. Jenna showed within 15 minutes later. I'd found us a table and ordered a watermelon slush with tapioca balls. I came across Starlight, Boba, and Hookah on one of my nightly wanders. I wasn't as much for smoking hookah, but Jenna had never been, and Bryn insisted she just had to try it once. This place is kind of trashy, Bryn said as she sat down. Bryn was 30-ish, a bartender downtown, and a bit of a goth. I couldn't quite understand why she sought out my 19-year-old roommate as a friend, but Jenna repeatedly assured me that she was really sweet. Yeah, it's in our budget. You guys pick the flavor. I don't really care. Ren picked peach. When it was my turn, I took a long drag, allowing the flavored smoke to coat my throat and calm my still jangled nerves. The digging homeless man still dominated my thoughts. Why was I obsessing over him, over that pale skeletal arm? I passed the hose to Jenna. Jenna breathed in, dragged a long tube, and bent over a fit of coughing. So Ren said to me, Jenna says you're writing a book of urban legends. It's a blog, I said, and not much urban legends as an actual story from people who lived in the neighborhood. Pulled the hose back to me. Ren nodded. Has anyone told you about the Mid-City Mauler? The what? Jenna asked, before collapsing into another coughing fit. The Mid-City Mauler, Ren repeated, her eyes lit up. She was primed to share an irresistible lip of gossip. She scooted towards me on the couch. This story is like crazy, she began. It all happened about 10 years ago. Now, right after I moved in. You lived here for 10 years? I asked, probably a bit incredulous. I couldn't imagine anyone putting up with the Werner building for that amount of time. Yeah, it's the only place in town that you can get kimchi on a taco. Not the point. Anyways, right after I moved in, people started fighting eating animals, birds, squirrels, whatever. Like something had taken bits out of them. I sucked out of their innards and left their corpses like chicken bones. But it wasn't a big deal, you know. There were a lot of feral cats around. When Bryn took another drag, pausing for dramatic effect. Then, the feral cats started dying. Same thing, mangled and chewed left where they fell. And after the cats, it was dogs, pets, and people. I couldn't help it. I laughed. There's no way that this is true, Jenna insisted. What like thing was in eating people? Ren raised her eyebrow. The first two were homeless. They found the first guy, some middle-aged alcoholic from Michigan, stuffed in a dumpster outside of his 7-Eleven. His throat torn out, both legs bitten off, and his intestines leaking. I bet you could figure out why this bothered so many people. What about a half-eaten, inveriscid man would some seriously disturb everyone? They found him in a dumpster, Jenna replied. A wild animal couldn't hoist a corpse into that dumpster. Bingo, babe! Bryn clapped her hands. And the lid of the dumpster was shut. Then 2 weeks later, they found a second bum in a boarded-up tobacco shop on 8th Street. The employees at the place next door complained of a bad smell. The cops came to check it out, and there he was, missing hobo number 2. Apparently, something had been living there. They had found some old, torn-up newspapers in a pile, like a bed. The cops didn't go into much detail, but the rest of the block kicked around a few contradicting stories. No one was sure exactly how long the homeless man has been dead, or how many pieces had been discovered in. After that, everyone started to go crazy. Koreatown turned into ghost town soon as the sun went down. There were stories. Some people thought there were ritualistic cult murders, something about a jackhammer noises at night. But every led to the police that followed went cold. Anyways, all was quiet for a month or so. The guy was saying his girlfriend hadn't come home from work and she hadn't been answering her phone. Grace Jimenez was the girl's name. Some waitress at a barbecue place. The cops found her in a few hours. Want to guess where? Jenna, I just stared. I had no desire to guess. The roof of their building, Ren answered, which was weird, because the only door on the roof was locked and deadbolted. The manager had only one key and an airtight alibi. He was out of state when Grace was found. And do you want to know what else was weird? The condition of Grace's body. Jenna gulped. Please, no more details. Fine, no details. All I say is she's been dead for at least 2 weeks. So why hadn't her lived-in boyfriend reporting her missing earlier? Ren paused again, took a long drag, blew a white cloud over her shoulder. Her boyfriend was the murderer? I asked. Ren shook her head. No, because her boyfriend swore she had seen his girlfriend lying next to him in bed the morning before her body was discovered. I'm not losing my deposit because of anything that came out of Win Casey's mouth. Jenna plopped down on her futon with a bowl of popcorn and Pepsi. I lounged on the sofa. 6 Google windows have got churning articles open on my laptop. She's telling the truth, I told my roommate. The Mid-City Mauler, active from estimated in May 2007 to August 2007. 3 known victims, though possibly more. Yes, 10 years ago, Jenna insisted. Whoever did it, I highly doubt that they were going to randomly pop back up again. She wasn't making me feel any better, and she knew it. She changed her tone. Look, if you're scared, we can buy a gun. Until then, I got a baseball bat under my head. I can do a lot of damage with a bat. You've watched. The lady had a point. When we work at Starbucks together, I walk with Jenna after our shifts to the park where her varsity softball team held practice. And yes, she was a powerhouse with a bat. Besides, Jenna continued with a smile, I feel like you're the girl who lives through a horror movie. Artistic, doesn't wear a ton of makeup, walking introvert mean, not like other girls. I made a face. You're making me sound like the Twitter counts that I want to punch. I, on the other hand, am the low-level person in uniform. I died 5 minutes after I first appear on screen. I laughed. Then shut my laptop and convinced myself I was being ridiculous. We signed a 12-month lease. I didn't want to go through the hassle of looking for another place, and I really couldn't afford to lose that deposit. At 4:30, I woke up. At 4:30 a.m., At 4:30 a.m., I woke up in a cold sweat. The man, the man digging, the skeletal homeless man in the abandoned parking lot. That eerie feeling, like hundreds of maniacal eyes fixed on me, stinging like a knife wound every time recalled it. I suddenly understood why. That hand, a pale white hand, graceful bony arm, extended in response to my repeated attempts to his attention. There was no dirt on his raised, oscillating hand. The man had been digging frantically, digging with two hands. He'd be digging as he waved. He had free hands. Well, that's tonight's story. There's actually, I think, five parts to this story. I'll catch that back up tomorrow. Thank you, Nikki XX, for letting me have access to narrate your story. I really appreciate it. This is my second story, though, and I really hope you like it. It's a really good story, and I like it. I have high interest